Hi, I'm Nikita. I guess there are quite a few new people today. So hi, I'm Nikita, and I'm going to talk about something that Vijay kind of touched upon in last Saturday's PIM session. So Vijay talked about how do you ignore the little voice in your head that tells you, I can't, right? So I'm going to talk about, let me share my screen, not the voice in your head. This time I'm going to talk about the voice. How do I get rid of this? Hang on a second. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of things. Okay, I still can't. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how do you ignore the naysayers. So all the people around you, not necessarily people who don't like you, but people who are your well-wishers, people who love you, those kind of people as well. All kinds of people who keep telling you, nahi yaar, nahi hoega, pagal hai kya, impossible hai ye to. You know, those kind of people, how do you ignore them? And we all know we need to ignore them, but the how is really the difficult task, because it's very difficult to ignore such people. Okay, so I'm going to firstly start by giving some examples of how many of these people that we all know of have been through the same problem, which is they had people criticizing them, had people telling them this is impossible, don't do it, give up. Okay, so if we look at, this is Abraham Lincoln, before he became the president of United States. He failed to to be elected on public office several times. And the reason he was given was he lacked leadership skills. Can you believe that? But he didn't give up. Marilyn Monroe, the agency she applied to for modeling told her, we've got a vacancy for secretary. Why don't you apply for that position? Because you don't have what it takes to be a model. Imagine had she given up. Here's Einstein. Einstein was actually expelled from his school for not being smart enough. Now, if he's not smart enough, I don't know who is. This is Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was, when he did his first gig, the manager told him he should go back to his previous job, which was as a truck driver, because he didn't have what it takes to be a singer. We have Steven Spielberg, who was rejected 30 times. His first story was rejected 30 times before he almost gave up, but his wife pushed him and then he believed in himself. We have Michael Jordan, who was kicked out of his school football team because he didn't have what it takes to be a footballer. We have Oprah Winfrey, who was fired from a daytime television show because she was not a good host. Now she has a show named after herself. And we have J.K. Rowling. Everyone knows she was rejected. Her Harry Potter was rejected 12 times by 12 different publishing houses before Bloomsbury took it on. We have Walt Disney as well, is a good example, who was fired from his first job for not being creative enough and not having good ideas. Here we have, this is Howard, most people don't know him, but this is Howard Tannen, who won a Nobel Prize. He was actually called crazy, not just by people who knew him, not just ajubaju wale log, neighbor types people, but people who really were good at the subject, which is the entire scientific community. He was a scientist. He was rejected by the entire scientific community because they thought his ideas were crazy. He challenged the dogma of the time, which was that DNA, genetic information, is transferred from DNA to RNA. But he said, no, the other way is also possible. And everybody thought he was crazy. 10 years later, he won a Nobel Prize because he was the one who insisted that is true. And then he found the retrovirus. We have, again, someone who saved thousands of lives, just like Howard Tannen. We have Robert Gallo. Robert Gallo wrote a paper in 1980, which was claiming that there is a virus very similar to the HIV virus, and people ignored him. People thought he was crazy. His paper got rejected. Then people, just months after that, people started dying of a sudden cause, unknown disease, which was named as AIDS. And Robert Gallo, he actually didn't just find the virus AIDS, he found a test immediately for it and a treatment for it, which is why AIDS is no longer a death sentence. So he also won a Nobel Prize for it. Again, these two, we all know them, Wright brothers. What do you think people reacted? How do you think people reacted to them when they said, we think humans can fly? Do you think people said, oh yeah, that's a good idea? Or people must have said, pagal ho gaye ho? So everybody has gone through this. And here, not just criticism, Galileo was actually prosecuted because he claimed that the earth revolves around the sun rather than it being the other way around. And we all know this famous person who was rejected by All India Radio because his voice wasn't meant to be on radio. Now, all these people did what they wanted to do. They believed in themselves. But again, the question comes back to how. How do you actually ignore all these naysayers? And here's what I'm going to ask you, okay? If somebody comes to you and asks you a question that is, or someone comes to me, chalo, if someone comes to me and asks me, Nikita, मैं ना 500 kilo weight lifting करने की सोच रहा हूँ. What is my answer going to be? I'm going to obviously say, pagal ho gaye ho, ye to impossible hai, hoga hi nahi. And why is that? Because I would take statistics ke a horse can barely take about 100 kilos. An elephant can take about 600 kilos. So a person lifting 500 kilos is impossible. And why am I saying all this? Because I have experienced it. I have a Labrador at home and my Labrador weighs barely 40 kilos. Forget lifting him. I can't even manage him. He drags me like 10 feet if I walk him. So from that experience, I would advise this person, don't bother. It's impossible. And that's exactly what happened to this guy here, who is Jerry D. And Jerry D pictured, he's got a Guinness World Book record for lifting 500 kilos, walking 10 meters in 18 seconds with it. Now, this is what Jerry D said. Okay, so Jerry D said, I'm going to lift 500 kilos. People said, that's impossible. But you know what Jerry D heard in his head? Jerry D heard, that's impossible for me. That's what people are saying. That's impossible for me. So going back to the previous example, agar ye mujhse puchta, can I lift 500 kilos? I'm going to think from my perspective, कि मैं 40 kilo का कुत्ता नहीं संभाल सकती. How can you bloody lift 500 kilos? And my perspective, I'm going to give him an answer from my perspective, which may not necessarily be the right perspective for him. So this is exactly what Jerry did. When he heard that's impossible, he heard it, that's impossible for me. And then he thought to himself, that's impossible for you, my friend, but it's possible for me and I'm going to do it. And he did it. Same thing happened to me. After listening to all these inspirational stories, I started believing myself. And about 15 years ago, when I was about to move to London, I had Ajubaju wale chacha ji and all came over and started giving salam ashura, you know, beta bahut life mushkil hai London mein, sab log jate hai, foreign jana hai, maza karna hai type soch ke, but bahut mushkil hai, racism bhi hai, aise jo lagta hai wo sab hai nahi वगैरह. And I didn't want to tell him बस हो गया अभी. So I asked him a question, चाचा जी आप रहे हो लंदन में? मुझे नहीं पता था. So he said, नहीं बेटा मैं कहाँ रहा हूँ, but मेरा बेटा जा चुका है और उन्होंने कहा कि बहुत मुश्किल है लाइफ. मैंने कहा ठीक है चाचा जी, अभी मैं ट्राई कर लूंगी. उन्होंने कहा जॉब ही नहीं मिलेगी, 6-7 महीने लग जाएंगे जॉब मिलने को, ये वो. सो पापा मुझे बोल रहे थे कि निकिता फिर मैं अपनी एफडी तुड़वा लूं, तुझे पैसा दे दूं, जॉब नहीं मिलेगी. तो मैंने कहा कोई जरूरत नहीं है पापा, आपको जो करना है करो. एंड मैंने कहा मैं जॉब भी करूंगी और वहां पे घर भी खुद ही ले लूंगी. So everyone laughed at me. So when I said I want to buy a house in London, this is 15 years ago, people said to me that's impossible. 30 crore lag jayenge, pata hai. So मैंने कहा ठीक है, that's impossible for you, but it's possible for me and I will do it. And for long story short, I am proud to say I did it. Not just that I bought myself a house within 6 months, I also got a job in so-called racist society in England as an English teacher. So as Nelson Mandela has put it, it always seems impossible until it's done. So just to summarize, don't listen to people because they are saying things from their own perspective. उनको जो लगता है, maybe it's impossible for them, और अच्छे भले लोग with good intention tell you it's impossible because it's impossible for them. If you have a dream, if you believe in your dream, go chase after it. And last but not the least, so ignore the voices of the masses, just focus on your 2 voices. And that's going to be, of course, your own voice and the voice of your coach. Because I've experienced this with Kiran. Every time I tell him some crazy idea, he doesn't dismiss me by saying, Pagla gaye ho, or, you know, it's impossible. His answer to me is, idea is great. What's the plan now? So have your idea, focus on your idea and work on your plan. That's the only way to go about going with your life. So thank you for that. And let me see if I can stop sharing this. Thanks,
Wow.
Kiran, to you.
Awesome, Nikita. It is priceless. No price can be put. In fact, Girija, we were discussing, we should not show the timer screen also. This is
Oh,
going.
sorry, I went over time. I didn't realize. I'm so sorry.
No, we were so mesmerized, all of us, that we didn't realize how much time you spoke. And while Girija was speaking to me or messaging, I was just laughing. The flow is so strong that points, the flow, the connect, the end point, the end summarization, everything was superbly aligned. Amazingly covered, Nikita. I hope people got some points. Awesome. Great.